Hey, this is Victoria Deaton, and today I am going to be talking to you about differentiated instruction. So first things first, differentiated instruction is also commonly known throughout the teaching profession as differentiated learning or differentiation. And because it's known as various things, this can be really confusing for some teachers, especially us new teachers, because it seems that we have so many abbreviations and names thrown at us, and we're quickly learning these things and it becomes really stressful. But throughout the presentation, I'll simply be referring to it as differentiated instruction just to keep things simple. So differentiated learning is a way of proven effective teaching that's reliant on tiered learning. So as a teacher, it's often obvious to us that we're not just teaching the grade level that we're assigned. Rather, all of our students that are placed in one classroom function on educational levels that are present in a large variety. For example, in my 10th grade biology class, I don't only teach 10th grade biology. I also teach 11th grade biology and 9th grade biology. All these students are in the same classroom during the same period. And it's because not every student assigned to that class understands material or concepts at the same level or same pace. So as teachers, we're required to tailor our instruction and our activities, designate the use of our resources, and partition our time to meet the needs of these students in all levels, just to make sure that all of our students are successful in our classes. And it's only possible when we teach each individual child rather than as a group or a whole. As a teacher, it's essential that we embrace the diversity of our students that are in our rooms, but the main goal needs to be that we're able to teach these students to their educational needs. So how is it possible that I can teach biology to students who are so diverse in one setting? For instance, in one particular biology class that I teach, one student can't read above a kindergarten level. I have 9 students who don't read above a 7th grade, 14 students are considered learning at their actual grade level, and 4 are way above their level. So how can I prepare these students for such complex concepts, especially when they're going to struggle at taking notes because the vocabulary is really extensive and it's way above their level? It's through this differentiated instruction that all students are able to tell me the parts of the cell or how the process of mitosis works, or even how we're related to other things. It's because they're learning at their own pace, and it's scaffolding from what they have mastered in content, adding to the more complex parts of whatever level of previous knowledge that they have. As teachers, we're in nature to treat every student the same, even though we have understanding that each student in our classroom has their own unique set of capabilities. However, treating students the same doesn't mean that each student is a carbon copy of each other, and that we should assume that each student is ready to tackle every task we throw at them, because theoretically they should know the knowledge needed to complete it. It means that we want to be consistent in the classroom and teach every student the material that they need to be successful later in life. The way we find a commonality to do this is to challenge our students based on their individual educational skills level. Not only do we want our students to learn the concepts we teach, but to be able to apply the knowledge that they have learned to everyday life, and sometimes that's more difficult for some students than others. Through differentiated instruction, we challenge our students on every level by providing enrichment and supplemental instruction to the students who may be struggling with the material, while advancing students who have mastered the content so they're using higher order thinking skills and taking their knowledge to the next level. Many studies have been conducted which have concluded that differentiated instruction supports the learning of students across all educational levels. One instance includes a 3-year study that took place in several classrooms in Alberta, Canada. These classrooms were specifically chosen because they inhibited a population of students who functioned on a variety of educational skill levels. The study included 31 math teachers and 645 students, ranging from gifted students to students with severe learning disabilities. All teachers agreed that all students were able to benefit from the differentiated instruction, which was determined by analysis of post-unit assessment scores. Students were able to produce higher achievement scores than any other year before, as well as many assessments in that particular year. It was highly credited to being able to differentiate the instruction into more flexible groups that allowed the students to be able to build their knowledge from their current skill level. When teachers plan their lessons, it's common for us to think of the class as a whole and simply plan a lesson that requires students to receive instruction and then be able to apply that knowledge to some kind of assessment. But we often forget to accommodate students who struggle in the classroom to allow for their growth. Students who are expected to do more than their ability allows them to can often feel discouraged about education simply because these expectations are so high. All they see is failure after failure presented in front of them. It occurs when the types of assessments or activities that we plan, they don't cater to the lower level of students by accommodation or by allowing that student to set small, obtainable goals for themselves. These are students who commonly appear mentally checked out during instruction because they feel it's useless, or they demonstrate behavior concerns as a way to hide their struggles. Simply, some just seem to not care about what's occurring in the classroom at all. But allowing them to be successful in the classroom on their grade level gives them the encouragement that they need to be able to tackle the assessments with success. For example, in my classroom, I have several students with IEPs that really struggle to complete tasks on level due to reading abilities and the vast vocabulary that a biology class throws at them. However, these students strive to perform and work tirelessly to achieve in my classroom. They're allowed to sit as a team, and they use resources on assessments and activities that help them be successful. So the reaction that these students have when they are successful is really priceless. Recently, many of them received A's on one of my hardest assessments that they'll take this year. The reaction was priceless. They were so full of smiles and so full of giggles. So they have continued to work really hard into the next unit with anticipation that they're going to perform just as well, and it's simply due to that they understand that it's possible for them to do well. Students who have an IQ of 120 or have tested to have specific aptitudes in a particular subject are considered gifted and talented students. Usually these students are high-performing students who understand the material quickly and easily, and typically the expectation of performance of their abilities is set at such a low standard than what they can perform, so they don't receive the education that they could potentially get otherwise. This error comes from the teacher's planning as well, because we typically plan one lesson that reaches one set of skills for students. It often creates boredom in the classroom for higher achieving students, and they lose their sense of curiousness because the information that they receive in class comes so easily to them. Therefore, teachers must learn to accommodate to these students by creating challenges that require them to think to a higher level. It boosts creativity and causes the student to become re-engaged in learning and applying that material at a much more meaningful level. It requires the teacher to step aside and allow that student to use their creativity and thought processes that lead them to a higher level thinking through research or individual studies of subtopics that drive that curiosity. At a secondary education level, each student has a goal of graduating high school, either college or career ready, and some students even have the aspiration of being both. These titles have been brought forth by the state and indicate achievement in technical and academic areas, but they don't ensure that the student is actually prepared for the future career path that they may choose in the days or months or even years after graduation. Recently, my 10th grade students have begun discussing ways to explore career options based on their interests and abilities. After surveying my students at the beginning of the year, their future career interests range from technical careers such as automotive and welding to nursing and teaching, which require college degrees. I even have some students who have set really high goals for themselves, wanting to pursue careers that require postgraduate degrees or licenses. And because my students are seriously thinking about the future, many of my students have dedicated themselves to learning as much as they can in these subject areas that pertain to their future fields. Making sure that the students who are going into a science-related field are learning as much science-related material as possible may be critical to their success later in life. Therefore, if these students who are high achieving, I can present them with more in-depth perspective by allowing them to go farther into that content than other students. If they're low achieving, I can make certain that they understand as many core concepts that they can to build from that as they progress in their education. This causes all students to gain the needed content of the class, but it also creates the strongest foundation possible for those students who will need it later in life. Although we know that differentiated learning helps a classroom, where did it come from? In past years of education, our first evidence of differentiated instruction relates back to the fact that it was a key component in one-room schoolhouses where teachers taught several grades in one setting to many students of various ages. The teachers in this classroom had to manage finding time to instruct several different levels of lessons and direct their time so that each grade level students were receiving instruction and assistance. However, at this point, it was not known that students could learn differently, at a different pace, a different style, or even that students could have now what is known as learning disabilities. The assumption was that all students could be learning the same and should understand content at the same rate as others of their age level. In 1912 brought the introduction of standardized testing in which all students of a specific age would participate in. In one aspect, there was a large demand for the increase in technology and those who could use it. On the other, there was a need for an order to be implemented within the schools. The implementation of standardized testing arranged for their use of technology, but also held each school accountable for their teaching, as the results had to be reported. When the results were analyzed, it was noted that there was a large learning gap between students of the same age who had taken the same test. It was noted that because of it, it was possible that students learned at different rates. This was the first case of document differences in students which would lead to further studies. This would indicate that the first noticing of gifted students and students with learning disabilities. In 1975, the Individuals with Disabilities Act was instated that ensured students who had disabilities had the same right to education as those without disabilities. Up until this time, students with disabilities could be denied admittance to public school, or if admitted, could be placed in a classroom setting only specified for students with disabilities. Therefore, students who had the slightest disability were being kept from having the same education of students without disabilities. With the Individuals with Disabilities Act, regulation was placed that students with disabilities were required to be admitted to public schools and placed in the least restrictive classroom. The students were able to learn in an environment where they could get the most similar education to students without disabilities. In classrooms today, this is where students with learning disabilities are in regular setting classrooms, but have individual education plans that allow them to have specific accommodations that allow the student to have the most similar educational experience possible to prepare them for the future. The No Child Left Behind Act, established in 2001, included a large portion of Title I that helped promote differentiated learning in the classroom. No Child Left Behind allowed each state to set their own standards, but required a state assessment to measure student growth of these standards to be completed each year. It set a minimum level of educational skills that students should be able to demonstrate mastery of on the state assessment and expected all students to be at that level. Students with disabilities were not excused from meeting the minimum skills set by the state, nor were they exempt from taking the state assessment. In fact, they were expected to meet these skills on the same assessment that was being required of students without disabilities. The only exception to this was that students with disabilities were able to have accommodations set by their individual education plans or 504 plans, which included extended time, scribes, readers, use of technology, and paraphrasing. It should also be recognized that No Child Left Behind Act established the minimum level of skills, but nothing more was required, meaning that once a student met that level, it had no regulation for other support in strengthening the skills that were in place. No incentives or programs were established for gifted students. States who wanted to offer programs to support these students were forced to fund the program themselves. After the act became law, funding was also cut, and many states who were funding programs had to eliminate programs due to funding loss. For instance, the funding for the Gifted and Talented program in the state of Michigan was depleted nearly 90% in the year after the act became law.